If you're that old and it's that cold and you're talking for that long without a hat and coat, you're going to die.
It was 16 degrees below zero.
It was a game that was decided by the weather.
Voluminous frizz.
You either stay home or you get a hat.
In any event, the weather has a vote.
What you wear, what you drive, who some of your heroes are, even who rules the world, all have been determined by the weather. Wars have been won or lost because of it. Inventions have been devised to maximize it. Even our sports and pop culture icons have become legends due to it. The weather impacts our lives in a million different ways. Hi, I'm Harry Connick Jr., and these events are more than just the deepest snowfalls or the most powerful tornadoes. They are the moments that inspired human spirit, changed the way we think about our world, and yes, even broke our hearts. They are the 100 biggest weather moments. And kicking off our countdown is a moment that still upsets one of the NFL's greatest coaches. It's one of football's most famous and frigid games.
You talk about a home field advantage. This was the ultimate home field advantage.
On December 12, 1982, the Miami Dolphins squared off against the New England Patriots during a heavy snowstorm.
It was snowing. You could not see the markings on the field. The sidelines were covered. The yard markers were covered. Our kicker falls down as he's trying to kick the field goal.
Both teams had missed earlier field goals as 9 inches of snow dropped on the icy turf. Going into the last minutes of the game, it looked like the contest would end in a scoreless tie when the Patriots got within field goal range once again.
Now, all of a sudden, during the timeout, out comes this snowplow, which, to make the whole story more colorful and ridiculous, is driven by a guy named Mark Henderson, who's on some sort of work release program from prison. And he comes out there, boom, boom, cleans up the area. Now there's a nice little patch for the holder and the kicker.
So I'm on the sideline just going crazy, you know, pointing that they can't do that.
Boom. Kick is good.
We get beat 3-0 in a ball game.
Don Shula naturally is not pleased by this.
What I should have done in retrospect is run out onto the field and thrown myself in front of the snowplow.
You know what? The Patriots probably would have run him over, and he still would have kicked the field goal.
It was a game that was decided by the weather as opposed to the talent of the two teams.
He's one of the greatest coaches of all time, but it still bothers him.
I wanted to go out there and punch him out.
You would be surprised how controversial this is. I've had people call me up and give me death threats.
Stradivarius violins have long been cherished by musicians. They are considered priceless works of art.
Sometimes people say, oh, there's a Strat for sale for $1 million. And you say, oh, really, what's wrong with it?
Experts have argued for centuries over the mystery of the Stradivarius. Why are they so superior?
Maybe it was human beings. It was Stradivarius had this magical way of making violins. It was the varnish. He found a way to make the perfect violin. Well, actually, Mother Nature played a big role in making that Stradivarius so great.
Just so happened that Stradivarius was living at the time of the coldest period of the Little Ice Age.
You know, you had cooler summers, you had longer winters, and that makes tree rings more dense, and so it's considered to give a more vibrant sound.
Attributing the unique tonal quality of a Stradivarius to the spruce wood he used outraged those who thought the theory insulted Stradivari and all violin makers.
This in no way, at all, discredits Stradivari as a craftsman.
You practice and practice passages, and then you play it on another violin, and they sound pretty good. But then when you play it on the Strad, it highlights it and articulates it. So incredible because of the purity of the sound.
Chalk another one up to Mother Nature, basically.
Mark Twain once mused that the Mississippi River cannot be tamed, curbed, or confined. During the spring and summer of 1993, his words rang all too true. The mighty Mississippi rampaged over its floodplain for over 200 days with torrents of lightning-filled thunderstorms. It was the costliest flood in American history.
Days and days of rain in June and July. or it just kept raining over the same area.
The wettest on record for the central part of the U.S., and all of that water had to go somewhere, ran off into every stream, every river.
Well, eventually it reaches the point where there's no place for that water to go but up.
Just unprecedented amounts of flooding.
You look at the aerial images, the satellite imagery, and the water had come up and spilled out onto that low farmland out there, and it literally looked like the Great Lakes now had another lake. And it was so slow to recede because all that water was still coming down from Minnesota and the Dakotas. It's in Iowa. Next stop, Missouri.
The river crested at over 20 feet above flood stage throughout St. Louis County. At its peak, the rate of flow of the water was so huge that it would have filled the bowl of an NFL football stadium to the brim every minute. When the river finally returned to its banks, some inhabitants began to rethink their options.
These are where people live, and it's a lake.
They actually picked up and moved some of the communities from their location. They just bought up all the property, and the community moved elsewhere.
It was literally a catastrophic event.
Almost everyone who's experienced cold weather as a child has heard this phrase from mom at least once while running out to play. Put on your hat and your coat or you'll freeze to death. And what do? What I did. We rolled our eyes, mumbled under our breath. Well, guess what? Mama had good advice. If only our 9th president had heeded these wise words, William Henry Harrison would be more than the answer to a trivia question. Kids, get ready for an I told you so.
William Henry Harrison's career makes a lot of sense. It's a sequence of superlatives. He was the oldest elected president up till that point, delivering the longest inaugural address, an hour and 45 minutes, on the coldest inaugural day without a hat and coat.
9th President of the United States, William Henry Harrison, took the oath of office at the age of 68. His advanced years were a political negative he sought to dispel immediately.
To demonstrate that age had not withered him, he went out and made what I think is the longest inaugural speech in the history of the country.
If you're that old and it's that cold and you're talking for that long without a hat and coat, you're going to die. And thus he served the shortest length of time of any president, 31 days.
Harrison spent his entire 31-day term virtually bedridden with pneumonia, becoming the first president to die in office. His party, the Whigs, pressed for a new election, but Vice President John Tyler, a lifelong Democrat, refused to step aside. Tyler further infuriated the Whigs by urging the annexation of Texas into the Union.
But all of this got into a national controversy and debate on whether to bring Texas into the Union or not.
It's plausible that without William Henry Harrison delivering that long address without the hat and coat in the cold and being as old as he was, that Texas might be its own country.
The weather played a very critical role in the development of the United States of America, geographically and politically, because the weather caused the death of President Harrison.
The first, I think, invention for weather purposes that is also actually cool.
Some form of eyewear has been around for thousands of years. However, it wasn't until 1929 that Sam Foster introduced sunglasses that protected eyes from the sun's glare.
After he sold that first pair, it became a huge rage within about a year.
Now we have polarizing lenses that can block not only the glare from sun, but actually block the ultraviolet rays significantly and therefore reduce the risk of cataracts.
Certainly a wise thing to wear them, and it's also kind of a cool factor nowadays.
We have gone through decades of different styles of sunglasses, and I think that's impacted fashion in a big sense.
They're a fashion statement, aren't they? Yeah. I have a pair of sunglasses called Glam. What more do you want? And they're polarized.
It's always been the kind of hip jazz beat thing.
Sunglasses are interesting because you can do a lot of hiding behind them.
The coolest thing about sunglasses is the fact that I'm looking at you and you don't know if I'm looking at you.
They have become an important fashion accessory, not to mention the fact that they're a very practical thing, an important thing to be wearing when you're in the sun.
Coming up next on the 100 biggest weather moments.
You do two things in a bad hair day. You either stay home or you get a hat.
The amount of time that you take to remove snow can make a difference whether people live or die.
Welcome back. Growing up in New Orleans like I did, you learn to live with a little excessive water vapor in the air. But even longtime residents of the Big Easy have a hard time handling one side effect of high humidity. As ladies will tell you, it ain't the heat, it's the hair.
Who doesn't have a bad hair day?
Worst hair day is when it's too humid, when you can't get it to lay down right.
Put me out there in the humidity in August, and you will see voluminous frizz.
I just consider it a different hair day.
Everyone knows that moisture is a good hairdo's worst enemy, but hair has always been the weatherman's best friend. On a humid day in the 1400s, German mathematician Nicholas Tekusa used sheep's wool to make the first hygrometer. Today, forecasters use the humidity readings provided by hygrometers to help them predict whether it's going to be dry or stormy.
A hygrometer measures the water vapor in the air.
The simplest hygrometer, you can use a human hair or horse hair, some other kind of hair, and as it shrinks or expands with the humidity, it can be rigged up to move a dial.
And you can stretch that out to have a hair like this long. And when you let it go, you put little marks on it, and then depending on the humidity, it will go like this.
It's been a while since I pulled a hair from my head, but one could do that.
The hygrometer gives us useful scientific information about relative humidity and dew points, but most of us don't need one to know when the humidity is high. We've got a head full of hygrometers making it painfully obvious.
You do two things in a bad hair day. You either stay home or you get a hat.
The champ. The challenger. Two great nations for winemaking, but only one with the respect it deserved.
The summer of 1976, to celebrate the American bicentennial, there was this fabulous tasting of American wines versus French wines in Paris.
Up until then, California wines weren't known for anything. They were typically the jug wines that everyone jokes about.
Tasted head-to-head, blind, the French were fooled. One French judge tasted an American Chardonnay and said, "Oh, back to France."
And then turning around and looking at their top French wines and saying, oh, this must be Californian, there's no body to it.
The French thought that they knew everything that there was to know about winemaking.
But when the winners were announced, the French got served 2 tall flights of shut-up juice, courtesy of Northern California's weather 1973.
French against American. The Americans won.
It was a revolutionary moment. It truly changed everything. It changed American wine forever.
Weather in Napa in 73, a couple degrees cooler than what we're used to now. Just happened to be one of those years that worked out perfectly.
The wines that won from America are all in the Smithsonian Institute, where America keeps its best treasures.
That's some fine weather.
Golfers will buy just about any gadget if it promises to add a few extra yards off the tee. But long before millions of dollars were spent on drivers with club heads the size of small cars, cagey players found an edge against the elements in something as simple as a dimple.
Golf is an ancient sport, and in the early days, the ball was perfectly round. And golfers discovered that if the ball got nicked somehow, that you actually got a little extra carry on it. And then eventually, golf balls became dimpled.
The little dimples on a golf ball create a boundary layer, we call it, a turbulent layer that allows the ball to travel faster.
The wind and the ball being able to ride the wind with backspin higher and higher up.
So golf can even be attributable to meteorological phenomenon, if you will, with low and high pressure, just like an airplane flies.
Golf is the one sport where so many different weather elements can be factors.
A cold, rainy, windy day can take, the #1 golfer in the world, Tiger Woods, and he shoots an 80, which, a lot of folks, oh, wow, hey, I shot an 80. But for Tiger in those conditions, he feels like he's a hack.
People play golf in any kind of weather, except, and they shouldn't be out on the golf course anyway, when there's lightning.
Every time you swing, you're holding up a lightning rod. That's pretty scary.
I remember hearing Lee Trevino's great statement. He said, if you're courting lightning on a golf course, hold up a 1-iron, because even God can't hit a 1-iron.
The amount of time that you take to remove snow can make a difference whether people live or die.
Much of New England came to a standstill in 1978 when a nor'easter with hurricane-force winds dumped record-breaking snowfall along the Atlantic coast. As the blizzard howled for 2 days with accumulations up to 4 feet, the great urban centers of the Northeast surrendered to the muscle of Mother Nature.
My dad's about 6'6", and I remember him trying to open the back door to let our dog outside, and the snow hit him in his chest. I'll never forget being basically buried in our house.
The storm exploded, became an incredible storm. The airport in Boston was closed for days.
The forecast for Long Island and southern New England had called for heavy snow to begin in the early morning. When the record accumulations only began to pile up around noon, commuters that had decided to risk it were caught completely off guard.
That's why you see pictures from this storm of cars stranded all over the place, because, of course, people try to get home.
The drifts become enormous. It's just about impossible to remove the snow.
There are battles and wars that have been conducted that aren't as complex as removing a major snow in New York.
And as if that wasn't enough, you get the ocean waves.
The surge destroyed many homes immediately along the coast.
Once the water receded, it left sort of a slushy mess that all froze.
I mean, can you imagine a storm which is a hurricane, and you're getting snow, and you're getting thunder and lightning? It was truly an amazing event.
Coming up, a closer look at snow flurries reveals a miracle of Mother Nature, and clear conditions allow hundreds of thousands of British soldiers to live and fight another day, when the 100 biggest weather moments continues. Welcome back to the 100 biggest weather moments. As soon as flurries are in the air, you can bet that children's mouths will be open. Catching snowflakes on your tongue is a wonderfully innocent winter rite of passage. But as the life's work of an early 19th century photographer helped us realize, it could also be an event that captures the infinite complexity of nature. Because each six-sided snow crystal that melts away just might be as unique as the person whose tongue it lands on.
Snowflakes are like people. Not two are alike.
Wilson Bentley was a farmer in Vermont around the turn of the century in the late 1800s. And as a teenager, he got into photographing snowflakes. Very near the end of his life, published in a large book. And it became very famous over the years as sort of the reference for snowflake pictures.
Bentley's observations of over 5,000 of these frozen masterpieces inspired the phrase that's been a source of delight and intrigue ever since.
I don't think I've ever believed that no two snowflakes are alike. It's a beautiful concept, and I think people want to embrace it because they see they're as unique as we are, or you are as unique as a snowflake.
Then in 1988, the Snowflake Man's claim to fame was put in jeopardy when a Colorado scientist found 2 unusual ice crystals.
Nancy Knight was taking pictures of snowflakes for meteorological reasons and found 2 which looked very similar.
I did not claim that they were alike.
How long can you keep 2 identical snowflakes looking alike, you know? She was on it.
They got blown up into a discussion of no 2 crystals alike, which I did not say in the paper.
You know, the question of alikeness in snowflakes depends a lot on what you mean by alike.
How do I know? I haven't looked at all the snow crystals in the world. I'm sure if Wilson Bentley said it, it's true.
Before insurance against the risks of weather, financial ruin threatened many businesses. The birth of modern-day weather insurance was born in Edward Lloyd's bustling coffee house near London's docks in 1688.
People didn't have offices or office buildings and to go to. It was a place within the city of London where people did meet, and coffee was sort of the big new thing.
As wealthy men and ship owners drank coffee, waiters ran back and forth to the docks gathering information about ships, voyages, and cargoes. When a drawing of a ship was posted on the coffee house wall, patrons would write their names under the drawing, signifying their willingness to underwrite the voyage in exchange for a premium.
The idea of the whole experience was to share the risk of high seas, hurricanes, typhoons. That coffee house eventually developed into a real trading place for merchants and became Lloyd's of London. So that was in 1688.
Taking its name from a humble coffee house, Lloyd's of London has become a world-famous international insurance giant, which continues to insure against the risks of weather. Today, big weather events carry big risks.
A hurricane season such as 2005 with Katrina, Rita, and Wilma has a devastating effect on the financial stability of insurance companies. Our loss for those 3 hurricanes was $6 billion.
In a complex global economy, insurance against the perils of weather serves a vital function.
The insurance business is the engine that runs the economy of not just the United States, but of the world.
Still ahead on the 100 biggest weather moments.
Any great leader has to have a sunny disposition.
And we're talking about quality of life. We're talking about cities that are more livable.
Show me your statistics. I don't believe you. No.
Welcome back. I'd like you to take a moment now and imagine you're on the Chamber of Commerce for a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, and you're looking to do something to grab a little attention. Put your town's name on the map. What's the first idea that pops into your head? Attract a new industry? Build a monument? Maybe start up a sports team? All good choices. But if your first thought was have a large rodent named Phil forecast the weather, congratulations. You're on the same strange page as the residents of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania.
He's real. I mean, Phil is, he's got his little computer lab underneath the little hole. People don't realize that. They think, oh, he just comes out for a little rodent. No, he's got a whole team. He has supermodels and supercomputers that he uses, and Phil's he's the real deal.
Thousands of people show up for it. There are TV cameras everywhere, and they actually have to pull this guy out of his box and hold him up.
On February 2nd, tiny Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania becomes the weather capital of the world. Every year since the ritual began in 1886, America's eyes are focused on a groundhog named Phil. If he sees his shadow, it's 6 more weeks of winter. If he doesn't, spring is just around the corner. Although no one knows just how many Phils have prognosticated over the past century, the accuracy has remained remarkably consistent. Wrong, about 60% of the time.
Phil, wrong? 60%? Lie. Show me your statistics. I don't believe you. No, not Phil.
We know that Punxsutawney Phil can't forecast the weather and can't tell you what the spring is going to be, but we do it anyways.
Because he's just so much fun. He's just so lovable.
People love that type of thing, and probably the movie Groundhog Day really boosted Phil's ratings.
You can see how much he's been copied. I mean, there are forecasting animals all over the country.
People will call and say, oh, wait, Staten Island Chuck said this, and Phil didn't say that.
There's even a snake in Arizona, Agua Fria Freddy. So, yeah, I guess they don't have groundhogs in Arizona.
I first got interested in skating when the driveway across the street from our house froze over. I was 4 years old, and I put on double runners, and I fell over backwards, cracked my head, and vowed never to put those stupid things on my feet again. And 5 years later, I put them on again, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
The thrill of ice skating started thousands of years ago. The earliest known skates date back to 1000 BC, found at the bottom of a lake in Switzerland. They were made from the leg bones of large animals with holes bored for leather straps to attach to shoes. Today's metal runners take advantage of the basic physics of friction and cold.
When the blade travels over, it melts a little layer and you get a little bit of water underneath the ice skate, and that's what makes it so slippery.
Originally, skates were for simple transportation along frozen canals and rivers. Even soldiers used ice skates.
How do you cross a mass surface of ice when you're trying to defeat an enemy? And, you know, I'd rather have skates on than shoes any day of the week.
By the 18th century, ice skating had taken Europe by storm as a recreation. It soon evolved into sport, culminating in the graceful athletics of figure skating.
On the professional level, it's an art form as much as it's an athletic endeavor.
It's beautiful. I mean, when you see people on skates, just especially doing the triple spins in the air and then coming on down, it's like, oof.
You can emotionally affect somebody, not just visually impact somebody. I laughed, I cried, it was better than cats. You get that in figure skating.
Now, you wouldn't normally think that a retreat and a defeat of your army is a miracle, but sometimes it's important for an army to be able to withdraw from one area to move to another.
In May of 1940, a ferocious Nazi attack swept the British and French armies into a narrow pocket of land at Dunkirk, France. With their backs against the English Channel and German bombs raining all around, the Allies' fate appeared to be total annihilation.
Imagine the British troops on the beach on the French coast. They're looking at capture, potential end of the war, invasion of their homeland. They want to get home.
The British pulled off a miraculous evacuation across the English Channel, and it was done not only with large ships, but mostly with small ships and private ships and yachts and sailboats.
Ordinary British citizens take out their ordinary little boats, and they rescue in small groups over 300,000 British troops and bring them back to British shores.
That was what they called the miracle of Dunkirk, because they were able to get so many soldiers back.
And it was the clear weather that allowed them to make the trip across the channel in those small craft.
If it had raging seas, these small boats would not have been able to navigate it.
Inspired by the heroic efforts of his people to save the army, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill used the spirit of Dunkirk to rally his nation back into the fight.
We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength. We shall never surrender.
Any great leader has to have a sunny disposition. Churchill had that. He had sound judgment, and he had the ability to inspire, and the weather cooperated with him.
The desire to qualify and quantify the unknown is inherent in human nature. Before 1969, when a hurricane was bearing down on the coast, there was no reference for residents to know just how rough the weather was going to get. But that's when two individuals demonstrated if you can achieve some measurement of an unknown, you can take away at least some of its mystery.
Nothing worse than an intensifying storm, no matter how small it is, upon landfall.
In 1969, Herb Saffer, a civil engineer, and Dr. Robert Simpson, then head of the National Hurricane Center, began collaborating on the Saffer-Simpson scale. They divided hurricanes into 5 categories of intensity to give preparedness and recovery agencies a resource for planning.
It really carries a meaning that just a warning of a dangerous hurricane would not carry.
The scale soon became a crucial warning system disseminated to the public at large.
The Saffer-Simpson scale gives us a basis of which to start, and that's the key. The stronger the hurricane, the higher the category number, if you will, 3, 4, 5, the more protection that you'll need.
We've got 5 categories. Category 1 is the weakest of hurricanes. Some trees go down, branches are lost. Category 2, a little more severe. Poorly built structures, you can have windows blow out. Utility shed will be tumbling down the street.
And mobile homes. You don't want to stay in a mobile home in a hurricane or any strong storm.
Major hurricane, Category 3, a lot of roof failures. Windows will blow out fairly easily. Category 4, any structure has some damage to it. Power is out everywhere in a Category 1, but now the power structure is severely damaged.
Category 5 is the worst.
Category 5, unless you have a well-built structure, it's probably going to be gone or severely damaged. If you get the high end of Category 5, you've got total devastation.
If a brick home is completely wiped off its foundation, you know it took one hell of a wind to do that.
I think the catalytic converter, it's one of these moments where you realize that we're doing something wrong and you can find a beautiful solution to fix it.
By 1975, there were over 200 million automobiles in the world. Smog levels in urban areas had gotten dangerously high. To comply with the Clean Air Act of 1970, Detroit automakers began installing catalytic converters to clean the exhaust of each new car.
A catalytic converter on your street car takes a chemical reaction so that when the exhaust comes through that, particles and chemicals that we don't want in the air can be reacted in a certain way so that they're made inert and safe.
The success of these mechanical marvels can still be felt in cities today.
If you ever visited a country where they still use leaded gasoline and they don't run their cars with catalytic converters, the air quality is so poor. When we think about solving these big problems, you know, we're talking about quality of life. We're talking about cities that are more livable.
Even in a city like New York today, the air is just much cleaner and much more acceptable. Not perfect by any means, but much safer than it used to be.
The last time I was in Los Angeles, I'm amazed to see all the mountains. It is so pretty. It's such a pretty place. When I was there in 1972, I didn't know it had mountains.
Catalytic converter is just, you know, it's a good thing all across the board.
To me, one of the most incredible stories of weather and humans and loyalty and courage is the Ernest Shackleton expedition.
The amazing quest of English explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton to become the first man to cross Antarctica began on December 5, 1914, as he and his 27-man crew sailed away from South Georgia Island, 500 miles north of the Antarctic Circle. His ship, the Endurance, soon entered what is known as the Antarctic pack ice, large sheets of dangerous drifting ice. He was carefully navigating through the pack ice when the extreme polar temperatures caused the ice to freeze solidly around the ship. Trapped inside the pack, the Endurance drifted helplessly with the ice for 10 months and for over 1,200 miles when finally she lurched, broke apart, and sank. Encamped on the drifting ice for 5 months, food and spirits were dwindling when the ice began to break up and they spied the barren Elephant Island. Leaving his crew on the island, Shackleton and 5 others then set out in a small lifeboat hoping to locate South Georgia Island, 800 miles east, an almost impossible task in the open seas. 17 days later, they miraculously arrived back at South Georgia Island. Shackleton, with local residents, immediately began planning the rescue of his crew left behind. On August 30th, 1916, after the pack ice had caused 3 failed attempts and almost 2 years after the expedition had begun, Shackleton finally rescued all 22 men.
Everyone lived, and that to me is just so amazing. I mean, he was the leader of this expedition, and it's your job to bring everyone home safely. But he literally went to the ends of the earth to do it.
That to me just says it all. It's courage, it's loyalty, and it's extreme weather.
Coming up next on the 100 biggest weather moments.
Decisions about when to attack have an integral component of weather.
This ship will never, ever, ever sink.
All that wind just blows. It's like a lawnmower going through the forest.
When the 100 biggest weather moments return. Welcome back. You've heard the phrase, clothes make the man. Well, wet clothes make a man miserable. And for much of our history, if man, woman, or child was caught out in the rain, the day and the outfit were pretty much ruined. But in 1821, the first awkward steps were taken toward creating a revolutionary fabric that would keep us warm and dry in even the most extreme conditions.
When Thomas Hancock, a rubber tycoon in England, teamed up with coat maker Charles McIntosh, they invented the first man-made waterproof material, rubber bonded to fabric. For 140 years, the world put on its Macintosh to brave the weather. Rain couldn't get through it, but there were some drawbacks.
You didn't know whether you were getting wet because the rain was going through the fabric or because you were generating so much body heat and you were drowning in your own sweat.
When I lived in Copenhagen as a young girl, I used to bicycle to school in my yellow rain slicker, and that was just kind of a fixture in my closet, probably for decades.
In 1975, the old yellow rain slicker finally gave way to a revolutionary invention called Gore-Tex. Invented by father and son team Wilbert and Robert Gore, this high-tech miracle fabric has billions of pores, each of which is 20,000 times smaller than a drop of water. Air gets in, moisture doesn't.
The use of Gore-Tex in the military made Gore-Tex available, I think, to the rest of the American public.
Everybody on our crew, all our actors, in some form or another, there's a Gore-Tex product above or below our clothing.
When I competed in my last Olympics, I wore a speed skating suit that was kind of converted into figure skating. So there was no restriction of movement and there was no weight to it at all.
It's a lot easier to be out there in that stuff than it is sweating under 10 pounds of rubber.
Now we have so many fabrics that protect us in all conditions that aren't necessarily big and bulky or screaming yellow.
She was the largest ship ever made. The RMS Titanic was hailed as a marvel of elegance and safety. But on her maiden voyage in April of 1912, the pride of modern technology steamed across the Atlantic for a port she would never reach.
This huge ship was built that everyone said, this ship will never, ever, ever sink.
But you've got fog, and unfortunately you've got an iceberg, and the iceberg hits the ship, and you've got a catastrophe.
We have this fascination with disaster, and I think that's why the Hollywood movie was such a hit.
Over 1,500 people perished. Due to a lack of lifeboats, many of the victims waited on deck for hours, contemplating their fate. The unspeakable tragedy led directly to the creation of an International Ice Patrol in 1914, which issues iceberg tracking information to avoid maritime disasters of this scale from ever happening again.
Nowadays, we either have devices on icebergs that are shooting signals off of them to warn ships that, hey, I'm right here, or they can see them with their ship's radar if they're above the surface.
In one of the oddest sidebars to the disaster, opponents of women's suffrage cited the Titanic incident. Since women were given priority in boarding the few lifeboats, they argued that men should be relied upon to take care of women, hence they had no need to vote. This sort of reasoning kept women out of voting booths for another decade, while conveniently ignoring the fact that it was men who had failed to provide adequate lifeboats in the first place.
You have just these little pieces of weather that by themselves don't appear to be all that dramatic. But when you put them all together, they change the course of history.
It's January 1991. The U.S. launches Operation Desert Storm, its first major military campaign in Iraq. The technology of the coalition war machine was impressive, but like every military campaign since Hannibal crossed the Alps, you need to forecast the weather accurately, or all your weapons, no matter how high-tech, may be worthless.
When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, the United States responded with its largest military venture since Vietnam, Operation Desert Storm. Weather satellites played a vital role in what has been called America's first space war. Sandstorms, dust haze, and thunderstorms would have been almost impossible to predict without their imagery to give information on the late afternoon jet stream that drove the desert's evening weather patterns.
The U.S. has a tremendous advantage in this realm because of the number of the constellation of satellites we have in orbit.
The Defense Meteorological Satellite Program was the military's first use of the satellite technology in support of military operations.
500 Air Force weather personnel fed crucial satellite information to commanders who used the data for planning targets, selecting munitions, redirecting airstrikes, and planning troop movements. With the advent of laser-guided weapons, the need for clear weather conditions placed an even greater emphasis on accurate weather reports.
Obviously, if you have a sandstorm, it's a little hard to use a laser-guided weapon.
Decisions about when to attack have an integral component of weather to them.
The Chinese philosopher and strategist Sun Tzu said, know yourself and know your enemy, and your victory will be certain. Know the terrain, know the weather, and your victory will be complete. Incredible damage there. It's the benchmark for Northeast hurricanes.
No one saw it coming, but the Category 3 monster that crashed into Long Island on September 21st, 1938 would never be forgotten. It had been more than 60 years since a major hurricane had clobbered New England, and the forecasters predicted they would dodge the bullet again. But this storm was different. Barreling out of the Gulf Stream with unusual speed, it still had killer force when it arrived unannounced in New England.
And that right front quadrant with that thing moving at 50, 60 miles per hour just blasted into New York, into New England, and just devastated the area. As typically happens in natural disasters, what's the worst possible thing you can think? It happened at high tide.
Tremendous flooding and loss of life up there.
Automobiles were crushed and twisted by falling trees and whirling timbers. Cutting a wide pathway of ruin inward from the sea, the storm piled up property damage in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
The count of downed trees is over 1 billion. That's an amazing number, but it's believable.
All that wind just blows. It's like a lawnmower going through the forest.
And it takes years and years and years for them to recover and come back. And they never come back exactly the same way. So you never have the community you had before. It's forever changed by one event.
Coming up next, a rescue on the edge of the world that had millions on the edge of their seat.
I immediately thought that I was going to die.
When the 100 biggest weather moments continues. Imagine you're living in the most desolate place on Earth. You're not only battling temperatures 100 degrees below zero outside your door, but you've been diagnosed with a dangerous disease growing inside your body. And the only doctor for a few thousand miles is you.
I immediately thought that I was going to die.
Stationed at the South Pole during its sunless winter, Dr. Jerry Nielsen diagnosed herself with breast cancer in June of 1999. Tragically for her, no airplane can land in the brutal winters of Antarctica.
You just can't get in, and a plane can't accommodate that cold of a winter.
Put an aircraft on the ground, the hydraulic fluid just turns into this thick goo.
Most people, including myself, who visit the Antarctic are only there in the summer. The people who winter over are stuck down there for about 9 months.
They told us that it would be harder to get us from the South Pole than it would be to get us off a space station.
It was an incredible moment. There was this desperate woman in desperate circumstances.
On July 11th, during the heart of winter at the South Pole, the Air National Guard attempted a daring airdrop. The world held its breath as the military plane, against all odds, successfully completed its mission, dropping urgently needed chemotherapy treatment. On October 15th, yet another heroic flight made the earliest seasonal landing ever at the South Pole to take Dr. Nielsen home.
We landed, we just kind of took a deep breath and erupted in this huge, screaming. We did it.
It was the first time that I had hoped that I might survive.
The umbrella as a tool, indispensable.
The origin of the umbrella goes back 4,000 years, when rulers of ancient civilizations used them as shade from the sun. The Chinese were the first to wax their parasols to use as protection from the rain. By the 17th century, the umbrella had evolved as a popular fashion accessory in France for women only. That changed when Jonas Hanway had decided that he and his gender had suffered one London storm too many.
Jonas Hanway, who decided, why should I get wet when it's raining? And he religiously carried an umbrella. He took a lot of ridicule, but you know what happened? Eventually, it caught on.
Umbrellas were considered feminine, but what they realized is how you hold the umbrella.
I'm very in touch with my feminine side. Oh, I think umbrella could be macho, depending on how you used it. I hold my umbrella like this,
It's very feminine.
Originally referred as the Hanway, the umbrella was first sold by James Smith & Sons in London in 1830. Today, the country of China exports nearly 1 billion umbrellas each year.
That first raindrop, boom, hits the ground. People are swarming selling umbrellas.
Now, if they could just find a way where the wind wouldn't get under that umbrella. If you walk through the streets of New York City after a rain, the trash cans on each corner are filled with just broken, destroyed umbrellas.
You have to have a good sturdy umbrella. You can't have one of these little wimpy things.
Who would go outside if it was raining without the umbrella?
Well, that's all the time we have. Coming up next on Weather's 100 Biggest Moments, a bolt jolts the Big Apple, a Midwest blizzard makes rock and roll history, and what just might be the greatest government conspiracy of all time. I'm Harry Connick Jr. We'll see you then.
And my father used to do his hair like James Brown. Because he had this James Brown hairstyle, could not have the wind blow through his hair. So we're this nice, middle-class African-American family, well-dressed, going to church, brand new Cadillac, and it was like we were in the steam room. We were pouring buckets of water out of our pores. Thank God for air conditioning, because now my suits don't look like I'd wet on myself before I got to church.